A new day. XX. We won. King Henry, I tell thee truly, herald, I know not if the day be ours or no, for yet a many of your horsemen peer and gallop o'er the field. Montjoy, the day is yours. King Henry V, Act 4, Scene 7. On a warm summer evening, a special meeting was convened in a private home in Clatsop County, Oregon. The house had belonged to a prominent local businessman, a Unionist sympathizer who left the area abruptly some years before after a heart-to-heart talk with some of the boys. Since he hadn't returned to reclaim or inspect his property, Zack Hatfield assumed he had no further use for it. He installed as caretakers a middle-aged white couple from Eugene, who had in turn been accused of nationalist sympathies and accordingly been made homeless by Fat Po bulldozers, and afterward he used the house as a way station and supply point, as well as for occasional conferences. Tonight Zack was playing host to a number of NVA officers who had gathered there on orders to watch a special nationwide television broadcast by President Chelsea Clinton. I have no idea what the hell is going on, Hatfield told anyone who asked. Orders from up top, everybody who can get to a TV set needs to watch Chelsea's speech tonight. I just hope the feds don't decide to drop a cruise missile or an assassination drone on this house tonight. You know the rumors are flying like bats out of a cave, said Leonard Ekstrom. Operations Apple's Mash and Pigkill have been tearing Zog a new one. Ekstrom referred to two long-range, long-term operations that the NVA had begun with the objective of disabling the two primary East Coast centers of Zionist rule, New York City and Washington, D.C. Yeah, and they need to stop flying, said Zack sourly. I've heard the buzz. I know what everybody's thinking, and I'm worried that we're getting our hopes up prematurely. There seems to be something going on, true, but my guess is it's going to turn out to be something nasty for us. I know our guys on the road tour have been turning a performance as good as Kat and the boys from Portland did down in Hollywood. I especially like what they've done with the New York Stock Exchange. What stock exchange? Asked Ekstrom with a hearty chuckle. Exactly, agreed Zack with a nod. Kind of hard to trade stocks in a hole in the ground. But if anything, the offensive we're carrying out right in the belly of the beast may bring on some kind of especially horrible retaliation here in the homeland, although I've no idea what they can feasibly do that they're not already doing here. But there's no way Zog is going to just throw in the towel and finally give us our freedom, Len. We're going to have to physically drive them out, every last soldier and bureaucrat and Jew, and then drive stakes through their hearts before they'll let us go. They can't afford to give in. Once they concede that the actual territory of the United States is divisible by race, then everybody's going to want a piece of the pie. The Mexicans are going to demand the Southwest for this Aztlan they've been hablamosing about for years. The niggers will want the South for New Africa. The Cubans and Haitians will demand Florida. The bugger boys may ask for some kind of faggot stand somewhere. The French might start getting stroppy up in Quebec again. Who knows where it will end? Every other continent is composed of multiple small nations, so why not this one? If we go, then the whole empire goes, eventually. The power structure doesn't dare give in to us, or they're done and their power is finished, and they know it. Even Axis Erica isn't giving us any clues, said Lieutenant Rick Parmenter with a chuckle, nodding over to a computer in the corner that was tuned to the nightly Radio Free Northwest Internet broadcast. I'm not sure it's polite for us to use the enemy's propaganda name for a comrade, said Lieutenant Sherry Tomzak primly. She has a notable sense of humor. I don't think she'd mind, said Hatfield. On the computer screen, a sultry Erica Collingwood was sitting at a table with a microphone in front of her and a large tricolor flag behind her. And that's the RFN news. The real news the Jews won't allow you to hear, she said in her mellifluous voice. Now here's a few quick messages for some of the boys out there, before we all tune in to hear what the brat has to say. Here's one for all you fabulous furry freak brothers. Fat Freddy's cat had a flea bath and he's ready to go home, so Phineas needs to get that organized. A message for Kenneth. The frequency is 99 balloons. I've also been asked to say that armadillos are the only animals besides man who get leprosy. Somebody out there knows why, and you know who you are. Oh, and Mom, Timmy needs some more of your apple pie. How come we never get any coded messages like that from Axis Erica? Asked Ekstrom. We don't, do we? No, chuckled Zack. I once suggested to Red that we use a code like that from her for something we were doing, and he clued me in on a little secret. Those messages of Erica's don't mean a damned thing. It's all gibberish, but it drives the enemy code breakers and intelligence analysts batshit trying to figure out what the hell she's talking about. They waste their time trying to make sense out of that crap, time they might otherwise use in doing us harm. So, no idea at all what's coming tonight, Zack? Asked Lieutenant Christina Ekstrom, who was sitting on the sofa in front of the TV. Hatfield shook his head. No, but Oscar and both our Portland Brigade commandants are in the next room chewing something over. Oscar and Tommy Coyle just got back from some big powwow the Army Council threw up in Seattle. Something big is stirring, all right. Hell, maybe Chelsea's going to announce the federal government's decision to deport the entire white population of the Northwest and give it all back to the buffalo as a nature preserve. You know, there are loony environmentalists who have suggested that very thing, commented Wayne Hill as he and Jackson and Coyle came out of the next room. It's time, guys. Turn the computer off and let's go from the beauty to the beast. Can you give us any idea at all, Oscar? Asked Hatfield. Frankly, Captain, before I say anything, I want to make absolutely sure that what we have been told is going to happen does in fact happen, said Hill soberly. A lot of people, myself included, don't trust these bastards in Washington, D.C. any farther than we can throw them. This may turn out to be some kind of trick or double cross. If it's not, then I have a series of orders from the Army Council for the Portland and Coastal Volunteer Forces, but let's wait and see if the brat says what she's supposed to. The TV was turned on to CNN, and Hatfield clicked the sound on. The first thing they saw was the ebony face of Paulus Ingram, a well-known network talking head who had the distinction of being one of the ugliest men of any race on television. His hair was artificially straightened, adding to the grotesque appearance of his round head and bubble-lipped face. Ingram had successfully defended his job as the lone African-American male commentator of any stature at CNN against a white woman, a male Hispanic, and the network itself. His last federal lawsuit had resulted in the famous Ingram injunction from the United States Supreme Court, forbidding CNN to dismiss him, demote him, or discipline him in any way, and had been hailed as a model for 21st century civil rights law. We're still waiting for the hookup from the Oval Office to begin, said Ingram, addressing a white female talking head, a Barbie doll blonde whose face appeared in the lower right hand of the television screen. The White House was behind her, illuminated in the muggy darkness of a summer night. I notice they don't show the Bremer walls and the sandbags, chuckled Coyle. I gather the brat is a bit jumpy since the bit with the exploding cigar at her dinner table, said Rick Parmenter. They've supposedly sandbagged her bedroom now. Pity nobody sandbagged her mother years ago, growled Hatfield. Ingram gibbered on. Apropos of what you were saying just a minute ago, Jenny, the president's announcement is definitely unexpected. We didn't get word ourselves until this morning. CNN has been informed that she and the vice president, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the director of Homeland Security met with a delegation of senior legislators from both houses of Congress this afternoon, and apparently what they had to say took these congressional VIPs by complete surprise. I have heard described to me that their faces leaving the White House were in some cases angry and in some cases simply baffled. It's also unexpected in that this is Chelsea Clinton's first nationwide address devoted entirely to the subject of domestic terrorism, outside of what might be considered the standard and obligatory references and expressions of our national determination to win the war on domestic terror during her State of the Union addresses. Ms. Clinton has in fact devoted most of her term so far to the social agenda that has always been her family's strongest point whenever the Clintons have been in office, as opposed to the Bushes, who are generally regarded as more prominent in foreign affairs and security issues. Although it has to be said, Clinton III has continued Bush II's strong line in the war on terror to the satisfaction of both parties. She's taken a firm stand on both Islamic terrorism in the Middle East and throughout the world, and she's been just as firm on racist terror in the Pacific Northwest. But this president has so far been content to leave security issues to the professionals, and in order to further professionalize the struggle against domestic terrorism, at the beginning of her term she signed off on the strengthening of the federal anti-terrorist police organization, both manpower and budget-wise, without hesitation, as well as the section allowing the relocation of local populations in the Northwest who are deemed by the Attorney General to be insufficiently cooperative with federal authority. a notable bipartisan effort that won her a lot of points on both sides of the aisle. "Yes, indeed, Paulus," said Jenny brightly. That was to be expected in view of the fact that the FATPO bill received bipartisan backing at the time of passage, notably from her mother, former President Hillary Clinton, in return for the Republicans' concession regarding the suspension of the 24th Amendment, allowed Hillary herself one more shot at the gold ring, and which will actually enable her to succeed her own daughter for an unprecedented fourth term. That would be one for the books, Paulus? But Washington is a goldfish bowl. Surely we must by now have at least some inkling of what the president intends to say. Ingram replied, "Well, Jenny, there is some speculation that she finally intends to declare at least 3 Pacific Northwest states and parts of several others to be in a state of insurrection against the United States, which is a step that congressional conservatives and liberals alike have been calling on the executive branch to perform for many years, and, if I may say so, if this is the reason for the president's address tonight, then it's not before time, Jenny. I simply don't know what else the level of terrorism and racist intimidation that exists in Washington and Oregon and Idaho could possibly be called, if not an armed insurrection. The official reason that this hasn't been done is that to do so would concede that the United States has in effect lost control over the Pacific Northwest and thus hand the terrorists a moral victory. But a lot of people have never really bought into that. I asked about that very issue earlier tonight when I had NAACP President Jamal Watkins on my show. Kenneth, we seem to have a little time. Can we roll that one clip while we wait for the president to make her appearance? The screen flashed to another negroid countenance. He was seated in a plush studio swivel chair. "I would very much hope that tonight President Clinton shall indeed finally take the necessary steps to address the problem of a racist terror in our society. The people of this country have long awaited some sign that those in power are ready to make a commitment to human decency and crush, exterminate, and cut off from the earth these white racist murderers who have defiled." Ingram broke in. "Wait, I have been informed that President Clinton has entered the Oval Office." The scene suddenly cut to the sad and rather confused-looking camel-like face of Chelsea Clinton. She was wearing a prim, almost dowdy tweed suit, and she was seated behind a large mahogany desk in the Oval Office, American and Israeli flags prominently displayed behind her. "God, every time I see her I wait for her to flap her flippers together and bark so some tourist will throw her a fish," said Christina Ekstrom. Chelsea was still staring silently at the camera, almost in a trance. "Come on, start the damn teleprompter," jeered Rick Parmenter. Someone must have done so, because the president began to speak. "Good evening," she said. "Tonight I wish to speak to the United States of America, and to the world, about something I understand and accept will be very much misunderstood, and which will cause deep feeling throughout the country. But what I must discuss with you tonight is an idea whose time has come, and it may well prove to be the beginning of a new era in this nation's long war on terrorism. For many years during the last century, terrorism was something that was restricted to foreign countries, mostly in the Middle East as the result of Muslim refusal to accept the sudden existence of a Jewish state in their midst where none had been before, and the Muslim world's subsequent abandonment of all civilized and humane standards of behavior in their effort to drive that Jewish state out of existence. As both the foremost ally of Israel and the standard-bearer of democracy and enlightenment, it was perhaps inevitable that the United States would be eventually dragged into that terrorist conflict. Then came the cataclysmic events of September 11, 2001. Ever since then, the United States has followed a policy of bringing democracy and freedom directly to the Muslim world, by persuasion and diplomacy where possible, by compulsory regime change where necessary. It is in the interest of all of humanity that Islam be required to embrace values and systems of government that will enable the State of Israel to survive and prosper, and thereby bring about the ultimate goal of all world history, a brotherhood of man. This administration, like previous ones, has continued this benevolent policy of imposing civilized thoughts and behaviors on those within the Islamic world who are unwilling to recognize the need to modernize their faith and bring it into conformity with 21st century human values, specifically rendering Islam inclusive of women, religious and racial minorities, and those of different sexual orientations. We will not falter in this sacred trust. Israel is intended by God to be a light unto the nations, and America was created to be the torchbearer of that light. That doesn't sound like they're throwing in the towel to me, growled Hatfield in disgust. Christ, what are Grendel and her mother planning on doing now? Wait for it, said Oscar. But closer to home, tragic events have taken shape, Chelsea went on. Our own country throughout its long history has never been free of the curse of racism, of intolerance, of hatred and bigotry, of contempt for minorities, and women and gays on the part of the heterosexual and patriarchal white males who controlled America and its resources for so long a part of our national existence. Within the past 3 generations, to our eternal credit, America has begun to step forward, out of the fever swamp of racial hatred, and into the green and pleasant meadows of brotherhood and tolerance, beginning with the Civil Rights Movement, led by the immortal and beloved Dr. Martin Luther King, and continuing on with the anti-Vietnam War movement of the 1960s, in which my own beloved parents grew to political and personal maturity. Your father never did grow to maturity, and your mother is an ageless being, neither young nor old, an immortal spirit of evil, muttered Billy Jackson. It was inevitable that there would be bitter and stubborn resistance to the march of the New World Order, said Chelsea, changing tone. Sometimes even violent and criminal resistance by men with closed minds and closed hearts. For many years, hate crime was dealt with swiftly and efficiently by law enforcement and the courts, and many white males paid the price for their refusal to turn their back on the past and accept the coming of a bright new day of tolerance and diversity where the black man, the brown man, women and gays of all colors walked proudly at his side as his equals, and more often than not, his betters. Up until a certain day in October, 4 years and 9 months ago, we thought that ordinary criminal procedures were enough to deal with this cancer of racism and hatred in our society. Unfortunately, we were wrong. On that October 22nd, evil men who had spent years creating and perfecting a diabolical criminal conspiracy elected to use a child custody case involving the Singer family of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, as an excuse to launch what can only be termed an insurrection against the United States. It's martial law, said Hatfield. Or maybe she's just trying to sugarcoat a really bitter pill, suggested Oscar. Chelsea continued to drone in a monotone. That insurrection has gone on for almost 5 years now. It has claimed thousands of lives. This very hallowed and historic home of the nation's chief executive, from which I address you tonight, has been attacked and damaged, and my own life and the lives of my family have been threatened. Some of my closest personal friends and political allies have been murdered. The terrorist campaign has destroyed billions of dollars worth of both government and private property, and not only in the Northwest. That destruction, combined with the lost revenue and the expense required to enforce the law and maintain security in the Pacific Northwest and, now in other parts of the country, is now literally beyond calculation, as I have been informed by the General Accounting Office. It's never the generals who surrender, comrades, said Hill with grim satisfaction. It's the accountants, Chelsea went on. Worst of all, the ongoing racial violence in the Pacific Northwest has distracted this great nation of ours both from America's civilizing mission in the Muslim world and from our domestic agenda of creating a true and inclusive paradise on earth, insofar as that is humanly possible, based on the ancient Jewish and yet also universal idea of a brotherhood of man. Assessing the developments in the Pacific Northwest over a lengthy period of time, I have come to the conclusion that if there is any chance of an immediate cessation of the violence and loss before the end of my term as president, then I have to investigate and assess it, regardless of my personal feelings in the matter and the deep-seated repugnance I feel in giving a vicarious legitimacy to terrorists, bombers, and murderers. But there are times when a leader's duty to her country and to human civilization itself demand that she make difficult and controversial choices. I have never feared controversy. I know that my decision in this matter will cause alarm, despondency, and suspicion in many quarters. I will tell you all tonight that these fears are misplaced. When you elected me as your president, you gave me a sacred trust, and I will never betray that trust. In this crucial time in our country's history, I must ask for your faith in my intentions, your support in this vitally necessary development, and your prayers. I do not like doing this one bit. But if I can end the horrific violence that has poisoned our national life for so long, and that threatens to undermine and destroy everything which makes America great, then it is my duty to make the attempt. I can do no more or less. Accordingly, I have today signed and issued 2 special executive orders. In my capacity as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the United States effective immediately, I hereby direct all American military units and law enforcement agencies in the Pacific Northwest to halt operations and observe a full ceasefire. I have received a reciprocal commitment to a full ceasefire from the... Chelsea suddenly stopped and pursed her lips, almost like she was trying to repress a cough or sneeze. "Come on, baby, say it," prompted Parmenter. "From the Northwest Volunteer Army, who shall in turn cease all attacks against American military, law enforcement, and civilian personnel from this moment on," she concluded, almost spitting out the sentence. "Did we agree to that?" demanded Hatfield. Chelsea hurried on. "Secondly, I am ordering that beginning on August the 1st of this year, a conference shall be convened at Longview, Washington, between representatives of the United States government and the Northwest Volunteer Army, in order to bring about a negotiated settlement which shall permanently bring this conflict and its murderous violence to an end. My fellow Americans, thank you all, and good night." The screen went momentarily blank, and then returned to the news studio and the gawping negroid face of Paulus Ingram. His bubble-lipped jaw was down to his chest. "Muthafuka," he suddenly screamed. "Dat honky bitch done sold our black asses out. She gon' surrender to those racist NVA Muthafukas." Hill reached for the remote and hit the mute button. The people in the room looked at each other in stunned silence. There was no cheering, no laughter, no exultation, no joy. The realization hadn't sunk in yet, and they were in shock. Finally, Hatfield said the words out loud. "We won," he said simply. "I don't believe it. Dear God in heaven, we won." "Not yet, we haven't," said Hill crisply, standing up in front of them. "There's many a slip twixt the cup and the lip, as the old saying goes." He pulled a notebook out of his pocket and referred to it. "This isn't victory yet, comrades. This is simply a very big opportunity that we can't afford to bungle. I have been instructed by the Army Council to let you know how we intend to handle this, and what your own roles in these coming events must be." "What's all that moo about a ceasefire in place?" asked Jackson. "What are we supposed to do if we run into any fatties on the way back tonight? Wave at them?" "In theory, ceasefire in place means just what it says," said Coyle. "In practice, we're going to make it mean the fatties stay in place while we grab everything that's not nailed down. What we've got here is a truce, which means the NVA will be able to surface at least partially and begin the process of assuming power in the homeland. Starting with areas like the North Shore, which are pretty much clear of federal authority already, thanks to Zack and you 3rd Bat comrades. You know, after almost 5 years of fighting, there's only any significant American presence left anymore in about 15 or 16 areas of the Pacific Northwest, the larger cities and towns. Everywhere else, the Americans hanging on by their fingernails, afraid to show their faces outside their police stations or their fortified courthouses, and there's huge stretches of territory throughout the Northwest where we've already run the bastards out, and for all practical purposes we're the government already, like right here where we're sitting. We haven't stepped forward in these areas too much, because we didn't want to give Zog stationary targets where they could bring their superior firepower to bear. But now we've got to. We've created a vacuum. Now we have to step in and fill it. This is going to be a time of transition for the NVA as well as for the whole country, said Oscar. We're going to be morphing from an underground guerrilla organization into a new government, a new army, and a new order of society. Under General Order No. 1, the Army Council has officially been the provisional government of the Northwest Republic. Now we start to turn that into fact. Zack, you are henceforth a government's administrative officer for Clatsop, Columbia, and Tillamook counties. That's just a stopgap title we dreamed up at the Seattle conference. Next week you'll probably be called something else, and we'll probably make you a general or something. But for now you're the basic head honcho for this neck of the woods. Your assignment is to assume full control of this area in both a military and civil capacity. Make sure everything runs as well as you can manage given the time of upheaval that's coming, and above all keep the United States and all its slimy forms out. Commandants Coyle and Jackson are in a somewhat different position, since their urban area of operation is still occupied by the enemy, and you will need to provide them with every support service you can. That will include recruiting and training of new troops, weapons, supplies, medical service, vehicles, intelligence. To be blunt, you've got to prepare for an assault on Portland in case Zog decides not to go quietly. I'm still not clear. Are we supposed to keep on fighting in Portland or not? Asked Jackson keenly. In theory, all fighting is supposed to cease, said Oscar. Hence the term ceasefire. In reality, we will be edging the Zionists out of everywhere we can edge them out of, and that ride will get a little bumpy. But we ask that you try to avoid any major confrontations that may upset the peace process, or whatever term they use for these long-view negotiations. Keep your heads down, and don't initiate any attacks except defensive ones. Define defensive, pressed Jackson. Anything you can get away with that doesn't totally upset the whole apple cart. Use common sense, Bill. Anytime there's an incident, and we're sure there will be plenty of incidents, we want to be able to holler that the feds were the ones who broke the truce. At some point, the question will come up regarding their evacuation of Portland under the terms of whatever treaty or agreement the Longview Conference comes up with. This whole command needs to be ready to back up with force whatever the new government decides in that respect. The time may come when they balk, or we just get tired of waiting for them to leave, and you will be called upon to secure the Republic's territorial integrity. But this time it will be as a real army, of a real nation, our nation, whispered Christina, her eyes moist. I still can't believe it. If only he could have lived another few months, just to see this day. You know, Chris, my new capacity as chief cook and bottle washer is going to give me a fair amount of authority in Astoria, said Zack. What do you think about Lockhart Avenue in place of Marine Boulevard? It was still Marine Boulevard on the next morning, overcast but warm, when Zack rolled into Astoria in his famous war wagon Humvee. Behind him rolled 6 truckloads of armed volunteers who peeled off and headed for their respective positions along the waterfront, in the downtown area, and to certain buildings that were to be commandeered for the use of the new regime. The high school was to become a barracks and training depot for the new National Army that Zack had been told would be called the Northwest Defense Force. He hoped that other arrangements could be made by the time school was scheduled to start in September. An observation post and communications transmitter was to be established at the top of the Astoria column, and guard forces against sabotage were to be installed on all the bridges across the Columbia River mouth in Young's Bay. The streets were quiet, traffic pulled over to let the NVA convoy by, and local pedestrians simply stood and watched in silent curiosity as Zack and the last truckload of rebels pulled up in front of the Clatsop County courthouse. There was little sense of history in the making. Sheriff Ted Lear was standing on the sidewalk alone, waiting for them. Zack clambered out of the Humvee, his broad-brimmed feathered hat on his head and his famous Winchester in his hand. "Morning, Ted," he said to Lear. "Anybody inside?" he asked, nodding up at the courthouse. "A few of the clerks and maintenance staff," said Lear. "Not much for them to do since you guys ran all the lawyers and judges off years ago, but they've held down the fort, I guess you could say." "How about your department?" Hatfield asked, looking at him. "Anybody going to give us any trouble?" "I called them all in last night and had a talk with them, after the president's speech," said Lear. "Them and what's left of the Astoria Police Department after you shot Sam Hall. I told them I was staying, but if anyone wanted to leave, they had my best wishes and Godspeed. A few handed in their badges, and they're home packing their U-Hauls. I probably could have listed their names beforehand. Some of them are scared you're going to retaliate against them for things past. Not yourself so much, but some of these men you have with you have seen the inside of our jail a few times, and there's likely bad blood against some of my deputies and Astoria PD officers. Or against me." "Not too much," said Zack reassuringly. "You were always fair. You were never the village bully or the Chamber of Commerce's chief head knocker, like some of the local coppers around the Northwest. Like Sam Hall was, that's what killed him. He was no loss. I never did like corrupt cops, and I found out he was one of the ones responsible for calling that invasion force of government thugs into my county. Some of the others who are leaving are just too old dogs to learn new tricks. The rest of us are staying." "How about you, Zack?" Lear asked. "Are you going to turn into some kind of medieval tyrant now, and decorate the streets with the heads of everybody who's ever offended you in the past?" "I am going to secure this area for the Republic, Ted, and I am going to make sure the Americans never come back," Hatfield told him. "You were an American yourself once," said Lear sardonically. "I was," replied Zack with a nod. I've found I prefer being a white man instead. To answer your question, Ted, we've had a lot of law in the past few generations. Too damned much law, and not enough justice. Now there's going to be justice, and some of it may be pretty rough, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as bad as people think. Not around here, anyway. Remember that little meeting we had up on the bleachers back at Astoria High one night some years ago? Remember what I told you we were going to do? Well, we did it. The people who need punishing and the people who don't belong here are all pretty much gone now, one way or the other. There's not going to be a need for any bloodbath. Elsewhere, the cities... He shrugged. That ain't gonna be pretty. But right now I want people here to learn that they not only need fear us, but that they can respect us and trust us. You can't win hearts and minds by going berserk in an orgy of vengeance, and I won't allow that to happen here. What about the Coast Guard station in Warrenton? Asked Lear. That's going to be ticklish, Hatfield agreed. You know Commander Ratcliffe? Pretty well, yeah, said Lear. Red, white, and blue fanatic type? Asked Hatfield. Duty type, said Lear. Will he talk to me? I can call him and find out, offered Lear. Am I still sheriff, by the way? Of course. Hatfield walked back over to the Humvee and took out a folded Northwest tricolor flag. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and walked across the street to the historic Astoria post office. Lear followed him. The flagpole was bare. The stars and stripes hadn't been run up there in a long time, by tacit agreement with the postmaster. Hatfield quietly unfolded the blue, white, and green banner, hooked it up through the eyelets, and raised the flag of the new nation to the sky. A breeze caught the fabric and the tricolor billowed out full for all to see. There was some scattered applause from the bystanders and a few cheers and rebel yells from the NVA men. Lear looked at Hatfield oddly. "You crazy sons of bitches," he said softly. "You did it. You really did it." "We did," agreed Hatfield. "By the way, Julia called just before I left the house this morning." "How is she?" asked Zack. "She's good. She said she watched the brat's speech last night, and she stayed up all night thinking and praying, and she's decided she's quitting her job down there in L.A. and coming back home to stay, immediately." "I'm glad to hear that," said Hatfield soberly. "I presume she understands that the rough stuff isn't over yet? That all this could still go bad, really bad?" "Yeah, she understands," said Lear. Hatfield sighed. "Now I suppose I need an office of some kind. You know the courthouse. What would you recommend?" "Well, if you're in a mood for irony, there's always the office of the old Clatsop County Diversity Commission, on the second floor," offered Ted with a chuckle. "The Mexican lady who used to be in there doesn't seem to have come in to work for a while." That afternoon, Zack and several other volunteers got into his war wagon and took a ride over to Warrenton. They drove down 12th Place and pulled up outside the main gates of the United States Coast Guard Air Station. The post was surrounded with the usual brimmer walls and rolls of razor wire, and a large stars and stripes flew defiantly over the gate, as well as a second one from the flagpole in front of the main building. Several M16 muzzles slid out of dark slits in the gatehouse. "Ignore them. Point the barrel high," he ordered his machine gunner, a German volunteer named Karl Vogler, who was wearing shades and a peaked alpine winter cap, some kind of German or East European military surplus. Vogler was one of the increasing number of foreign volunteers who were finding their way to the Northwest to fight for white freedom. There had already been talk of forming a separate German-speaking brigade in the new Northwest Defense Force. "They have us covered, sir," said Vogler, staring at the gatehouse. "I know. Just disregard unless they do something. We're not here in a hostile sense, at least not yet. I just want to have a word or two with the station commander." After a time, the gate opened and a Coast Guard officer in full uniform stepped out, Commander Anthony Ratcliffe. Hatfield noticed Ratcliffe was wearing a sidearm, but he left his own Winchester in the Humvee when he got out of the vehicle. He walked up wearing his usual tattered canvas duster and floppy Northwest fedora-style felt hat with the feather in it, and he saluted the scowling Ratcliffe, who didn't return it, nor did he offer to shake hands. Hatfield ignored the Coast Guard man's discourtesy. "Afternoon, Commander," he said conversationally. "Name's Hatfield, officer commanding the NVA 3rd Battalion, 1st Portland Brigade. Sorry about the civvies. I understand some of our guys up in Washington have uniforms now, but they haven't gotten around to issuing us any down here as yet. Don't even know what they look like." "I know who you are," said Ratcliffe. Sheriff Lear told me you were coming. I suppose I should be grateful that you've only murdered 6 of my sailors over the past few years. Your sailors had skins the color of shit, so they're not allowed here anymore, replied Hatfield easily. Your predecessor knew that perfectly well, and yet he still sent them into town. I notice you don't. As it happens, we have no more African American or Hispanic or Asian American personnel serving in this station, said Ratcliffe. I know, said Hatfield. Smart move on your part, or whoever made that call. Whatever point your predecessor was trying to prove, at least you don't try to prove it with the lives of the men under your command, and I respect that. What do you want, Hatfield? Demanded the commander. First off, to let you know that the NVA has now occupied the town of Astoria, and we are assuming the civil authority in Clatsop County. In the coming days, we will be occupying Warrenton, Seaside, this whole stretch of coastline, preparatory to the transition of this chunk of real estate to the government of the Northwest Republic. I presume you heard the president's speech last night? I did, said Ratcliffe. I am sickened and horrified that she is considering turning over the sovereign territory of the United States to you, not to mention astounded. No more astounded than I am, Commander, said Hatfield. I really thought we were going to have to scrape the last of you up off our streets with a shovel. I heard her mention a conference to be held up at Longview. I didn't hear her say anything about transitioning civil authority to your so-called republic here or anywhere else. Barked Ratcliffe. No, she didn't, agreed Hatfield. I guess it's a good thing we have no intention of asking her permission. It's over, Ratcliffe. We've won. Do you think the President of the United States would have made a speech like that or called that conference in Longview if the Americans hadn't decided to throw in the towel? You're an American yourself, snapped Ratcliffe. Actually, no, replied Hatfield. In case you hadn't noticed, that's what these past few years of shooting and blowing things up have been all about. Just because I was born in a stable doesn't make me a horse, or in the case of the United States, a horse's ass. We've decided that we will choose what we want to be and what we want our children to be. War is when you let the government tell you who the enemy is, Ratcliffe, like you do, like I used to. Revolution is when you decide who the enemy is for yourself. Oh, there's still a lot of yada yada and flapdoodle to be gone through, at Longview and maybe in D.C. or elsewhere. But the main point was conceded last night. They're going to give us our sovereign independence. Maybe with a lot of kicking and screaming and face-saving rhetoric and bullshit. But we're going to get the Northwest Republic. Or else we'll just take it. Either way, there's no turning back now, and I suspect you know it. Let me ask you something. Whose idea was it really to get all those Black and Beaner naval personnel out of this station? Ratcliffe hesitated. Mine, actually, he said. Must have been quite a hard sell to your superiors. Surprised you didn't get brought up on charges of racism. Why did you do that? Take a risk like that? Give in to our wicked and evil terrorism and all? Asked Zack. We have a specific mission here, one that has been made a lot harder by the conditions you people have created over the past few years, and I didn't need the added aggravation of having to protect certain members of the Command 247, replied Ratcliffe, somewhat defensively. It was a decision I made for the good of the unit. Yes, we know. Your mission is air-sea rescue for ships and crews in distress on a particularly dangerous stretch of open sea, the Columbia Bar, the graveyard of the Pacific out there. Hatfield gestured in the direction of the ocean. You also assist the Columbia River pilots when necessary, whenever a ship out there gets into trouble. You've stuck with carrying out your mission to save sailors' lives, and you haven't allowed your base here to be used against the local community by Fatpo or Blackwater or other criminal elements in the employ of the United States government, despite what I imagine must have been some pretty heavy pressure. Heavy enough, admitted Ratcliffe. We didn't want to make ourselves targets. Like you said, we're here to save lives. We appreciate your situation, sir, and you know damned well we've reciprocated, Hatfield told him. Have we attacked this station? Has a single Caucasian member of your command been fired on or harmed in any way in all this time? No, admitted Ratcliffe, although I keep all off-base trips to a bare minimum. Sheriff Lear has been extremely helpful. Your guys must be going stir-crazy in there, commented Hatfield. We've got computers and satellite TV, said Ratcliffe with a shrug, and a very good games room. Well, I think it's a good idea for you to keep your men cooped up for a while longer, said Hatfield. We're going to be doing things in town you shouldn't see, lest your duty compel you to start telling tales out of school. You've got, 120 or so people in there now? Almost all of them support or medical personnel or technicians, pilots, and so forth? Never mind, I don't expect you to tell me. Just keep on doing what you do. You leave us alone, and we'll leave you alone, if it turns out that's possible. Here's a card with my cell number on it, he said, handing the card to Ratcliffe, who took it without comment. If there is any trouble, give me a call, and we'll see if whatever the problem is can't be settled by talking instead of shooting. White men have murdered one another over the past couple of 100 years. Because we can't seem to decide who this continent belongs to, Commander. I say there's been enough white men killing one another. It's a habit we need to get out of. Your superiors are probably going to ask you to do some things that might upset the apple cart. Like using your air-sea rescue helicopters to spy on our troop movements, that sort of thing. I understand that you may not be able to resist such orders even if you are so inclined. You have to understand that if I come to consider your presence here a threat to my own men, or to the community here, we can, and we will take you out. You know what happened on a certain beach a few miles south of here. We've got more manpower every day, and we're starting to acquire enough heavy weapons to do it. But I don't want this little Coast Guard station here to turn into a northwestern Fort Sumter. All I ask is that you play as square with me as you feel your duty and your honor allows, and let's get along while the guys in Longview who will be doing the negotiating on both sides do their jobs. If you need help of any kind from us of an emergency or a humanitarian nature, you call me. There's been almost 5 years of slaughter in the Northwest and there's going to be more. It just doesn't have to be here. I'm going to go now. Thank you for your time, Commander. Before he turned around and walked back to the war wagon, Hatfield snapped him another salute, and this time Ratcliffe returned it. The 3 counties of Oregon that comprised the 3rd Battalion's operational area were in fact one of the largest stretches of territory in the homeland free of American civil or military authority, and accordingly these counties became a major staging area for the provisional government. By late August, Zack Hatfield was officially General Hatfield of the Northwest Defense Force and military governor of the district. He was assisted in his duties by a growing staff of local people, including businessmen, former government employees, managers, engineers, merchants, community leaders, and technical specialists who managed to make sure that the electricity in the towns and the rural areas stayed on, the sewage and waste disposal systems worked, the stores remained stocked with at least an adequate amount of basic necessities without shortages or runaway inflation, and civil order was maintained. Gasoline and diesel fuel were the hardest things to obtain. Prompted by a heavy Christian evangelical element in their senior management, the major oil companies attempted to cut off fuel delivery to local stations in nationalist areas and send the racists back to horse and buggy days, to quote one Texas corporate spokesperson. However, on their way back from D.C. and New York, some of the boys from Operation Apple Smash and Operation Pig Kill made a stop-off in Houston. Within the space of a week, the CEO of Exxon turned the ignition key on his Ferrari and was blown through the roof of his garage. The chief financial officer of Gulf Oil was found hanging in his pool house by his own necktie, wearing only black net stockings and high heels and lipstick, and the huge garish main tabernacle of an evangelical television ministry that was one of Israel's main financial and scriptural supporters was leveled by a truck bomb full of gelignite. The 2 charred objects resembling human bodies found in the ruins were assumed to be the televangelist and his beehive-haired wife. After that, fuel deliveries to the nationalist Pacific Northwest quietly resumed. The price of gas even dropped a few cents per gallon. At the beginning of September, Sheriff Ted Lear and his remaining officers, sheriff's deputies and town police from the municipalities, were mustered en masse into the new National Police Force, the Northwest Civil Guard. Ted was given a brevet rank of major and a new uniform, a heavy khaki shirt, dark green trousers, and jackboots with the Alpine-style ski cap as headgear. I look like a Nazi stormtrooper, he grumbled, especially with this thing. He thumbed the eagle and swastika patch sewn over his right shirt pocket. I think that's kind of the idea, said Hatfield. I'd say of all the movement's various factions and tendencies, over half of us are National Socialists to some degree or other. Helps balance out the fanatical Christians, the Christian identity element, The libertarian quasi-anarchist types, the pagan fanatics, the heroic vitalists and whatnot. National Socialism is turning out to be a unifying thread because just about everybody agrees with at least 90% of it. What's a heroic vitalist? Asked Ted. Haven't got that quite figured out yet, admitted Zack. But it sure sounds cool. The military and political situation in the Northwest remained volatile and tense. The peace negotiations had commenced on schedule, with delegations from the NVA, the United States government, the Red Cross, the United Nations, and every media outlet in the world stuffed into the huge Lewis and Clark luxury hotel on the outskirts of Longview, Washington. Every television channel, including those that had been taken over by the New Republic's fledgling Northwest Broadcasting Authority, was filled with almost nothing anymore but news. Reporting from the conference, interviews with participants, official statements and press releases, speculation, rumors, gossip, and a tsunami of outright propaganda from both sides. The negotiations dragged on over many weeks with nothing seemingly getting accomplished, while out in the hinterlands of the Northwest, the nationalist forces quietly squeezed Zog out of large swaths of territory. A village here, a stretch of road there, a factory or police station somewhere else fell into the NDF's hands every day. Everywhere except in Portland itself. Zack's main worry militarily was the fate of the bridges across the Columbia River, the two main ones at Astoria and Longview, and also the bridges over Young's Bay between Astoria and Warrenton. We're vulnerable as hell, he admitted to his staff in one of their regular conferences. Those bridges get bombed out, and a few more get knocked down along Highway 101, and we are virtually cut off from the rest of the country here. The Americans can do it too. Not sure why they haven't yet. They have jets, copter gunships, B-52 seconds, cruise missiles, robot drones, and God knows what else, and they can blow those bridges any time they want to. We have no anti-aircraft capability at all on the ground besides small arms, and our Air Force at this moment consists of a collection of Cessnas and other private planes, as well as some media newscopters we've confiscated. I thought we were going to get some SAMs from the Ruskies, sir? Asked newly minted Major Rick Parmenter. There's some kind of holdup, said Hatfield. The Russians have been quietly backing us for years, as you know. What with the way successive American governments keep grinding their noses in the dirt, determined to keep Russia a third-class world power militarily and economically. But now that things have reached this sensitive point, they don't want to be seen to be backing us. There have been enough questions raised already at Longview and elsewhere about all these Russian small arms and ammo that keeps rocking up in our hands. The fact that our negotiating team was flown into Longview by a thinly disguised Russian military helicopter and a Russian crew wasn't exactly subtle either, remarked Colonel Leonard Ekstrom of the NDF's new Quartermaster Corps. I asked Red about that, and he said basically we simply didn't know which Americans we could trust not to have a mysterious accident on the way in, Hatfield told them. Be that as it may, the Ruskies understand that the U.S. government is now naturally anxious to hold on to air superiority as a bargaining tool, since if these negotiations go south and the war resumes, it will be more conventional in nature, and they might finally get a chance to use some of their high-tech toys against us. Moscow wouldn't mind upsetting that apple cart, but they don't want it to be too obvious about it, hence the delay in getting our SAM batteries delivered. But that doesn't help our immediate problem. That gung-ho Marine general in Portland, Delmar Partman, has been saying some ominous things about refusing to go along with any treaty negotiated at Longview if it sunders our precious Union, as he puts it. I don't know if that move is being scripted for him from Washington or not, whether somebody is winding Partman up, or whether he doing this on his own. But Third Section seems to think that he's dead serious about refusing to surrender and forcing a pitched battle, which the Jews hope will create a chaos situation and give them a chance to tear up the treaty and return to full occupation again, blaming the whole thing on us, of course, added Colonel Wayne Hill grimly. The Provisional Government of the Northwest American Republic, acting under the mandate of the October 2006 draft Constitution, created back in the days when the movement was little more than one half-insane old man playing with his computer, had instituted a Bureau of Race and Resettlement to begin dealing with the problems caused by the massive population movement and dispersal. In Portland, Marine General Partman issued more and more bellicose statements about refusing to surrender the city to the nationalists regardless of whatever was decided at Longview. In the rural areas, skirmishing continued between the expanding NDF and the remaining government forces. The result was a two-way flow of refugees, Unionists fleeing into Portland, and streams of white people who either harbored nationalist sympathies or simply wanted to get away from the bullying black and brown thugs of Fatpo, who fled away from the city. There was a steady flow of traffic up and down Interstate 5, most remaining non-whites in the Northwest, as well as many white middle and upper-class families packed their belongings and fled from what they feared would be a cartoonish totalitarian state of the kind the media had always portrayed all past white nationalist regimes to be. At the same time, massive numbers of white families from California and the Southwest packed as well and fled to the Northwest for fear of the growing Hispanic separatist Frente de la Raza movement. The FDLR was already staking a claim to a new Hispanic state of Aztlan to be located in the Southwest, either as an independent nation or possibly a United States territory or even a province of Mexico itself. Much of the incoming white flight came to the North Shore area. While the North Shore had in fact been seriously underpopulated for years and could well afford some new blood, especially younger white blood, the influx did create some logistic and supply problems. The BRR set up transit centers in places like Astoria and Seaside and Clatsop County, including one in a former bowling alley on Astoria's newly renamed Lockhart Boulevard. One cold and damp night in early October, Major James Wingo was filling in as officer of the day at this transit center, helping to process lines of incoming white refugees and their families who were being issued with temporary ID documents and assigned to a wide variety of housing according to need. Sometimes the Republic's newest residents were given quite upmarket housing that had been vacated by fleeing Unionists, sometimes crumbling tenements and trailers that had been vacated by Mexicans, sometimes dormitory-like facilities in whatever school auditorium or gymnasium or sequestered building could be adapted for such a purpose. At the moment it was luck of the draw. Wingo was standing off to one side talking to Captain Christina Ekstrom, who had voluntarily assumed the duty of housing and transportation officer for the asylum seekers, when he felt a tug on his sleeve. He turned and found himself facing an elderly woman in a ragged dress and coat, with a seamed face and thinning white hair. At the old woman's side, holding her hand, was a little girl who appeared to be 5 or 6, thin and blonde with watchful and suspicious blue eyes staring up at him. There was something disconcertingly familiar in the elfin little face, but Wingo couldn't quite place it. "Can I help you with something, ma'am?" he asked. "I know you," said the old woman. "I saw you once on TV." "Yes, ma'am, I'm sure you did." "I do a few toothpaste and barbecue sauce ads on the side," said Wingo. "Don't be a smartass, young man," snapped the old woman. "I want to ask you something important. When I saw you on TV, you were shooting up Flanders Street in Portland with a machine gun. You was with that cat-eyes Lockhart guy and somebody else, a girl named Kristen McGee." "I'm May McGee, Kristen's mother. This is her daughter, Mary Ellen."
"Can you maybe tell me where Kristen is now?"
"Oh, Jesus," said Jimmy softly to himself, his heart sinking and his knees going weak. "Yes, ma'am, I know who you are. Kiki told me about you both. She loved you both very much. I don't know how to say this, how to tell you this." He waved his hands vaguely. "She's dead?" asked May flatly. "Yes, ma'am," said Wingo helplessly. "She was killed in action back in January. You're sure?" "Yes, ma'am. I was there when it happened. I am truly sorry. Your daughter was a brave soldier and a good comrade and friend. We all miss her." "Well, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised," said the old woman with a sigh. "I never quite knew what to make of her after she went with you lot. I suppose I can guess why she did it. I just always wondered if she was sure about it." "Yes, ma'am, she was sure," Wingo told her. "I think I knew in my heart I'd never see her again, one way or the other." "Well, we got to get on a bus. That young lady says she's going to give us an apartment, maybe one we can keep if things work out." May turned to get back into the line for the transport. "Wait a minute," said Wingo. He pulled a notebook and a pen from his tunic pocket and quickly wrote down his name and thrust the paper at her. "My name is Major James Wingo, 1st Battalion, 3rd Oregon Brigade, NDF. I want you to keep this, Mrs. McGee. Please, I don't know what is going to happen over the next few months. I might not make it myself, but I want to try and keep track of you and Mary Ellen as best I can through the bar, and I want you to remember my name. I'll check back here later on and I'll try to find you, but if that doesn't work out for some reason, you try to find me. Now isn't the time and place to get into all this since we don't know what's going to happen, but one way or another, if I'm still around, I want to help you and your granddaughter, any way I can for Kiki's sake. May looked at him steadily. You know what she was, before she came to you? Yes, ma'am, I know. I also know what she was afterward, and that's all I care about. I owe her mother and her child everything I can give them. I mean that. May stuck the paper in her pocket. My guess is you don't know as much as you think, but Ellie and me have been living mighty rough these past few years, and we have to take it where we find it, so I might just take you up on that generous offer, Major. The month of October dragged on. The days chill but clear, the leaves on the trees turning golden and layering the ground, the morning fog growing denser. Around noon on October 22nd, the daily staff meeting of the 3rd Brigade Command gathered around a long table in their conference room in the old Clatsop County courthouse, a converted courtroom. The walls were now papered with maps and shelves and filing cabinets, and a large tricolor flag hung on a staff over the chair where once tyrants in black robes had sat when they sent white men and women into living hell. It was 5 years to the day since the morning that the U.S. Marshals had surrounded Gustav Singer's house in Coeur d'Alene to take away his children, because he and his wife told them inappropriate Norse myths and fairy tales at bedtime. But something on that morning had finally snapped, and America's gun thugs soon lay shot to pieces in their smashed body armor by Singer's neighbors. Still no movement in the situation up at Longview? Asked Colonel Leonard Ekstrom. Well, there's activity of a sort, said his daughter Christina Riley, tossing over a copy of today's USA Today. The front-page photograph, taken with a telephoto lens and rather fuzzy, showed 2 teenaged members of the NVA delegation to the peace conference, out on a hotel balcony locked kissing in a passionate embrace. I'd make some comment here about our tax dollars in action, if we were paying taxes. Hey, aren't you supposed to be wearing Major's oak leaves now, Chris? Asked Zack Hatfield. You're out of uniform. Ask the quartermaster, she said, pointing to her father. He doesn't have any. What's the latest intel on the Portland situation, sir? Asked Major Tony Campisi. I had a talk with Mr. Chips by coded wireless chat before I came over, reported Hatfield. A code I hope the kikes can't break, because things may be about to blow. NDF General Barrow has informed the Army Council that the conference at Longview is about to come to a head one way or the other, probably with a walkout by our people because the Americans keep on stalling. The whole thing seems to have turned into a delaying tactic, although no one quite understands what they're delaying for. If an agreement is in fact reached, that Neanderthal jarhead Delmar Partman definitely intends to more or less mutiny against the Brat and the Sea Hag, and refuse to surrender the city to us. I never got the impression that Jarhead Ape had enough moxie or brains for that, said Captain Jerry Lungard. Somebody in D.C. is winding him up, we're sure, said Hatfield. No good Marine would dare do such a thing as defy his commander-in-chief unless he had the most powerful political backing he could get.
My money's on that Jew-rat Howard Weinbaum.
He's acting as point for the irreconcilables on their side at the conference. Turns out he was behind that little project a few months ago of trying to set up evangelical death squads to wage guerrilla war against the Republic, but SS General Carter Wingfield nipped that shit in the bud. How bad will it get if he does, do you think? Asked Christina. Hatfield frowned. Bad enough. Partman has almost 2 whole Marine divisions in the city, plus the Fat Pose and assorted unionist militia, police, and some Somalia-style gangbanger militia he's using as terror squads to keep what's left of the white population cowed, at least 35,000 men. The NDF's numbers are growing day by day as thousands of young white men and women step forward, some of them coming from all over the world. A lot of them have prior military service, but most of them are raw recruits. Our basic training out at Camp Relia is necessarily rushed, and we're still not up to par on our weapons and equipment. We've been trying to harass the enemy and cut off their supplies, but in a city the size of Portland, there's all kinds of reserves of just about everything they can beg, borrow, or steal. Partman is going to launch an offensive with all he's got, most likely across the river against General Wingfield in Vancouver, but maybe down this way against us. Partman has the backing of a lot of powerful politicians in D.C., New York, and Houston, the ones who never wanted this conference to take place at all. When he stages his mutiny, they're going to wave the red, white, and blue all over the media, praising this patriotic Marine who is semper fi to the good old US of A, yada yada, you get the idea. They're going to threaten Chelsea with impeachment unless she backs off, renounces Longview, and resumes the war. Hell, her father and mother were both impeached unsuccessfully, and it never seems to have bothered them, said Campisi. This time the impeachment move would be with the full backing of the whole Progenist lobby, who backed the other Clintons back in the day, explained Hatfield. Hillary's still running things, of course, but it could be that she's decided she doesn't like the odds and it's time to backtrack. The problem from our point of view is that we can just about assume that General Partman will launch an air attack on the two main bridges across the Columbia River, here in Astoria and the bridge at Longview. He's kept the Portland bridges up because he will need them for his own attack into Vancouver, but he's not a complete idiot. He knows he needs to stop the NDF from reinforcing each other either way across the river. He can't leave those bridges up on his left flank. We figure that's how he'll make his mutiny announcement, by formally breaking the ceasefire and blasting down both bridges over the Columbia, and maybe the bridges across Young's Bay as well for good measure. And to be honest, guys, I don't see any way we can stop him. We've got nothing but pea shooters. Comparatively speaking, what has he got by way of air power? Asked Ekstrom. Latest report, 2 fully loaded B-52 seconds and 4 F-16 seconds at Portland Airport that 3 Sec feels are loyal to him and will obey his orders to devastate their fellow Americans, or former fellow Americans, said Hatfield. Plus a number of Apache and Black Hawk gunships he could also use against the bridges. Fortunately, PDX isn't big enough to take many more military aircraft and still keep the civilian traffic flying, and he needs the runways for supply purposes. Those B-52 seconds can level the bridges in the towns of Astoria and Longview as well from 30,000 feet, if he gives the order. Will we need to implement the evacuation plan, sir? Asked Lundgaard with concern. I'm sorry to say yes, I think we may have to, but I don't want to give the word until the last minute, said Hatfield. Len, how are we coming on the bomb shelters? We've got 8 designated shelters fitted out around Astoria and Warrenton, mostly basements of public buildings, said Ekstrom. I really don't know how they will hold up under a combined B-52 and F-16 strike. I saw those damned things at work in Iraq, said Hatfield with a scowl. An arc light doesn't leave much behind. Goddamn Partman's buzz-cut soul to hell for even thinking about turning them loose on white people here. Crack in on the evacuation plans in case we all have to beat feet in a hurry. You won't have to worry about the B-52 seconds at any rate, General, spoke up a voice from the doorway. Hatfield looked up and saw Eric Sellers entering the room wearing muddy and stained coveralls. He was followed by Annette Ridgway, who surprisingly was dressed in full United States Army fatigues including boots, headgear, and second lieutenant's bars. Hatfield stared at her. Comrade Becky, may I ask how the hell you got in here wearing that get-up without being shot? He demanded. Oscar brought us in, sir, she replied, saluting him. I'm afraid I didn't have time to change. I used this ensemble to get into the secure area in Portland Airport. Tom's right about the B-52s. They're gone. Burning rubble on the tarmac, confirmed Eric with a grin. The Red Baron racked up 2 more Allied aircraft last night, blowed up real good. There were cheers and applause around the room. The F-16 seconds and the copters? Asked Hatfield keenly. They were moved to another part of the field, said Eric, shaking his head. They're still operational. Just afterward, we learned our safe house had been compromised, and Oscar decided to do a long E&E out here. He has something he wants to talk to you about, and he didn't trust our communications. Suddenly, Colonel Wayne Hill, dressed in an incongruous sports jacket and tie, ran into the room. Turn on the TV, he shouted. Now, there's something happening in Longview. Hatfield snapped the television set on. The picture came onto a large crowd scene in front of a building on extensive landscaped grounds, the Lewis and Clark Hotel in Longview. There was no sound, and Hatfield fiddled with the remote, thinking it was on mute, but then he realized that the silence was due to the fact that the entire crowd, of at least 10,000 people standing around the hotel, spilling over onto the golf course, into the parking lot, and along the highway, was in fact dead quiet. The cameras were focused on the flagpole in front of the hotel, and the people in the conference room watched in growing shock and dawning joy as the Stars and Stripes was slowly lowered from the mast and folded by two men. "That's General Frank Barrow, the head of our delegation, and General Brubaker from the U.S. Air Force. He's the top American military rep at the conference," said Hill in a low voice. Barrow handed the American flag to Brubaker, who clutched it to his chest, overcome with emotion. Then a woman stepped forward with a blue, white, and green bundle in her hand. Her face, even at this distance, was seen to be scarred and peeled, the mark of long years of torture and abuse at the hands of the FBI and FATPO, because of her refusal to betray her own husband. She was a legendary figure in the NVA. "That's Kathy Frost," said Hill. "I'd heard they brought her in up there to stir things up." The woman hooked the tricolor to the lanyard and slowly raised the flag of the Northwest Republic over the land. Not for the first time, the tricolor had been flying in many parts of the homeland for several months, since President Chelsea Clinton's speech. From hidden speakers somewhere in the hotel, there crashed forth the mighty orchestra and chorus of what sounded like a hymn. "What is that?" whispered Christina in wonder. "I know that song." "You remember it from long ago in church, honey," said her father, his hand on her shoulder. "It is a mighty fortress, a hymn written by Martin Luther, Ein festem Berg ist unser Gott." "They are singing in German," said Sergeant Carl Vogler, Hatfield's driver. Tears were streaming down his face. "So they are," said Hill somberly. 1945 is avenged, corpse brooder. "A century of tyranny, oppression, and murder is avenged," said Hatfield. Annette and Eric hugged one another, their eyes glued to the scene on the television. For a long moment they all simply stared at the screen, unable to take it all in. A long moment that stunned the entire world. But it lasted only for a short while for 3rd Brigade. Immediately the cell phones of almost every officer in the room started bleeping, and Hatfield snapped off the TV. "Comrades, on the day that General Order Number 10 is lifted, whenever that may be, I want you all to join me for a champagne toast to our new independent nation, followed by a rip-roaring blast of the best Northwest microbrew we can scrounge up. Until then, we have work to do. The first thing you need to do is clean out that Coast Guard station in Warrenton," said Hill soberly. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about, Zack. We know there's been a series of top-secret coded communications between the headquarters in Portland and the station across the water there. I don't know what they're saying to one another, but it can't be good. You know that Buzzcut Birdbrain Delmar Partman will be sending his remaining aircraft to destroy the 2 Highway 101 bridges here. You can't have a nest of enemy military in your backyard anymore, Zack, to act as spotters or disrupt our military and civil defense during an attack. You need to move on that place now." "F-16 seconds are mainly fighters, as I recall," said Zack. "They can be rigged with bombs, but mostly they rely on missiles and chain guns. They'll have to get in a bit lower than the B-52 seconds would have, and their bomb loads won't be as potent, but they can still get the job done, and we don't even have any radar to let us know when they're coming." "Should we close off the bridges to traffic now?" asked Len Ekstrom. "If they get hit with cars still going across them, civilian casualties will be bad." Hatfield shook his head. "Not yet. Those bridges are crucial to the normal supply and functioning of this whole part of Oregon. Never mind the Washington side as well. I want to keep them open as long as possible, not to mention avoid getting the Columbia estuary blocked to shipping with rubble and bomb debris." "Oscar, is there any way we can get any kind of warning as to when the aerial assault is coming?" "We've got people watching PDX, and they'll call us the minute they see any of the Marine F-16 seconds or helicopters take off," said Hill. "That might give you a few minutes warning. It's about 90 miles from PDX to here, which is just a short hop for an F-16. Longview is closer, so they will most likely be hit first. Don't be too downbeat, though. There's still a chance we can find some way to get through the airport perimeter and destroy the warplanes on the ground. I just hope Partman doesn't get any support from other Air Force units around the country who might send him more aircraft." "We're willing to go back and take another stab at it, sir," said Eric. "We don't know how much time we've got," said Hatfield. "We need to get hold of that Coast Guard installation now. I've developed something of a rapport with Ratcliffe over the past few months, but he's still an enemy commander, and he might decide to try some bad acts during an air raid. I sure wish we still had Don Hacker up here to talk to him. You know, that officer who swam ashore at Sunset Beach and Sherry's kids picked him up? But he's up in Seattle now trying to sort out our new Navy. Hatfield pulled out his cell phone and dialed. After a while he spoke. Commander Ratcliffe? General Hatfield here. I'm sure you can guess why I'm calling. You saw what happened at Longview? He listened to Ratcliffe for a bit. I can understand your feelings, sir. I'm not sure which of us is more surprised, but it looks like the deed is done. That leaves us with a problem. I have it on good authority that U.S. Marine General Partman in Portland intends to mutiny and to launch his own private little war, to be kicked off with. An air attack on Astoria and Longview to destroy the bridges across the Columbia River. And possibly with a ground attack as well against this part of the Republic. Things here are about to get a lot more complicated, and I'm afraid I must insist on immediately assuming command of your installation rather than waiting on whatever formal arrangements are being worked out. I will be at your front gate in an hour's time, under a flag of truce. Please speak with me before you do anything rash, but I need to tell you up front that this time I'm going to have more than my driver with me. I hope you will surrender and spare our new nation a shedding of blood on this great day. But if you resist, then it is my duty to proceed against you. See you in a bit. Should you have warned him you were coming? Asked Len Ekstrom. I may be wrong, but I get the impression Ratcliffe has his own private reservations about the society and the government he's been serving all his life, said Hatfield. I want to give him a chance to make the right decision, and save him as much face as I can if he decides to take the bloodless way out. Hopefully he'll just use that hour to skedaddle. If not, I'll try to talk him out. Tony, scramble 1st Battalion and any of 2nd you can find, and let's get over there. All the mortars and as many as you can find, and the EOD guys with their whiz-bangs. Oh, and bring our secret weapon. What secret weapon? Asked Hill. The secret weapon turned out to be the old 7-pounder field piece from World War I, which had once decorated the front of the courthouse in corroded glory. The old cannon had been commandeered, cleaned of rust and verdigris, sanded and polished, and repainted a convincing gunmetal gray. A blue, white, and green roundel had been painted on the battered armor shield plate in front of the breech. You're not really going to try to fire this thing, are you? Said Hill, looking over the relic. Do you even have any shells for it? Zack, there are cracks in the barrel, for God's sake. It's over 100 years old. It would blow up in your gunners' faces. Ratcliffe and his people don't know that, said Hatfield. We unfroze and rebuilt the breech blocks so we can open and close the breech nice and flashy, and we've got some guys who worked out a routine of loading dummy shells Len made up in his basement. Ever hear of? Quaker guns? Same principle. It might concentrate Ratcliffe's mind if he thinks we've got an artillery piece. How many real rockets and mortars have you got? Asked Hill as they rolled in convoy across Young's Bay on one of the threatened bridges, a convoy of troop trucks strung out behind them. Hatfield looked skyward, hoping that none of Partman's marine attack helicopters or jets chose this moment to show up. 4 mortars that I'm using for this attack, if it turns out to be an attack, he said. Plus the end of day people have built some Stalin's organs they want to try out, racks of 16 solid fuel rockets mounted on flatbed trucks. The rocket fuselages are made of PVC pipe, of all things, and the fins are plastic, but each one carries a 100-pound warhead of assorted He and shrapnel, and the racks are reloadable. They've been test-fired out on our little proving range, and by now the crews can more or less hit the broadside of a barn with them, drop a pattern over about a 200-square-yard area up to 2 miles away. I don't want to use them in a populated area like Warrenton unless I have to. We have a plan worked out in case we have to assault the base, in battalion strength, mortar and automatic weapons fire, to keep them pinned down inside while we use good old-fashioned scaling ladders to get over this one section of the fence we've spotted that looks vulnerable. Failing that, we've got a plan B involving ramming a truck bomb through the main gate and blowing it, but I really don't want to fight the Coast Guard. They're not combat troops. They're lifesavers and medics and genuine good guys, most of them. I'm hoping Ratcliffe will see reason. By the time Hatfield pulled up in front of the main gatehouse, Ratcliffe had seen more than that through his binoculars. From his watchtower he had seen hundreds of NDF soldiers, some in their new tiger-striped camouflage fatigues, some still in civilian clothes, moving through the surrounding streets and clearing the inhabitants out of houses that were in the line of fire. He had seen the Stalin's organs being set up and brought to elevation, hundreds of yards away to the east and north of his base. He had seen the 81mm mortars being lugged in between houses and behind fences on his perimeter. He knew he was surrounded and outnumbered by a force that included many combat veterans from the insurrection and also from America's imperial wars in the Middle East, including some of the men and women who had decimated his own service and sank a Coast Guard warship at Sunset Beach. While his men had the edge in formal training and they were holding fortified positions, the attackers would have the advantage in numbers, and on this day, having seen their new nation born before their eyes, their morale would be stratospheric. Finally, he saw an antique cannon pulled behind a Toyota Tundra being unlimbered and set up in the road 150 yards in front of the base, the muzzle level dead center at his front gate. The crew opened the breech and rammed a shell into it. Zack Hatfield rode up to within about 30 yards of the gate in his war wagon, followed by a Jeep Cherokee. "Who's that?" he demanded of Oscar, pointing at the Jeep. 2 women and a man, all in NDF tiger-striped fatigues, got out of the Cherokee. The man began setting up a tripod and a camera. "What the hell?" said Zack. He walked up to them. "Julia?" "Hi, honey," she said, giving him a quick kiss on the cheek. "Need I ask the obvious?" demanded Zack. "My first assignment on my new job with the Northwest Broadcasting Authority," said Julia. "Historical documentation of the events surrounding the transition from American Empire to Northwest Republic." "This is Erica Collingwood, by the way." "Hello, General Hatfield," said Erica demurely. "Julia's told me a lot about you, I can imagine." "Welcome home, comrade," said Hatfield. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I didn't recognize you not covered in blood or cockroaches. I always thought The Boogeyman Does Boston was a classic." "You would. She'll be doing the narration and voiceover," Julia told him. "I always wanted to be an independent producer, but I never thought I'd be doing my first documentary film with Erica." "Comrade Collingwood, I assume you acquired a taste for being shot at on Oscar night. But what's your excuse, other than the obvious one that you've lost your mind?" he asked Julia. "You know this could turn into a firefight at any moment?" "Yes, I know, but whatever happens, we're here to record it for posterity," said Julia. "Plus, get some more of those hunky shots of you waving your Winchester in the air." She fumbled around in her field jacket pocket. "I have an authorization and clearance from the Army Council to accompany the NDF on operations, subject to blah blah blah," she said, pulling out a sheet of paper. "Never mind, I wouldn't know what such a document looks like anyway," said Hatfield. Behind him, Hill cleared his throat and gestured toward the main gate of the Coast Guard station, which was now standing open, and Commander Anthony Ratcliffe was standing outside waiting for him. "Oh shit, let me go see if I can talk this guy out of a bloodbath. Try not to get shot, both of you." He turned and walked to the gate to confront the base commander. "Is that Erica Collingwood?" was the first thing Ratcliffe asked him, his hand over his eyes and peering at the camera crew. "Yes," said Hatfield. "The taller one is the woman I'm going to marry if things work out, so you can see I'm kind of motivated to find some way to convince you to let me in there without all kinds of shooting and explosions." "Does that thing work?" was Ratcliffe's second question, pointing at the cannon. "Wait a minute, I know that piece. You stole it off the courthouse lawn. No way that hunk of junk is going to fire after 100 years. We had to rebore the barrel, make a new breech block, and add all kinds of rubber fittings and whatnot to the carriage, so it would roll, not to mention manufacture several hundred of our own shells, some which I have to admit are of indifferent quality. But they made good weapons in those days. Some of our snipers are still using Mausers and Enfields from World War I, not to mention two, in perfect firing condition because they've been kept up. That gun works fine on the range, and it will blow your gate and your interior structures to shredded wheat," lied Zack briskly. "Not to mention the mortars and our guys who will play you a tune on Uncle Joe's ukulele, and if those don't persuade you, we've got enough just plain dynamite we can throw over the wall. I can get proper artillery and even some tanks from Salem or Vancouver if I want, but I'm not going to divert crucial equipment for a pointless sideshow like this. There's not going to be any siege here. We've got too much more important stuff to do to waste the time and effort and blood. You've got over 2 miles of perimeter to defend, and you don't have the manpower to do it. You know damned well we're coming in today, Ratcliffe. The only question is how many people will be lying here dead when the sun goes down tonight. Look, Ratcliffe, you seem to be a decent guy, a guy I wouldn't mind having a few beers with someday when they revoke General Order Number 10. But if you kill a single one of my wonderful kids out there because of some stupid mixed-up idea of loyalty to this filthy evil empire that has turned this whole planet into a slaughterhouse and a cesspit, then you're going to piss me off bad, and when we get in there my mood is not going to be sweet.
Well?
Ratcliffe sighed. I called a formation after that ghastly spectacle at Longview. I talked to my people. To my horror, but not to my surprise, some of them want to stay here and join you. Probably more of us would stay if our families weren't elsewhere in the country. And vulnerable to American retaliation, said Hatfield. May I ask where your own wife and children are?
With my wife's parents in Amherst, Massachusetts.
Once things started getting bad here, you will pardon me if I didn't trust their safety to your Aryan chivalry. You seem to be a fairly decent guy yourself, Hatfield, but you've got maniacs like O.C. Ogilvy and that crazy hillbilly John Corbett Morgan riding with you as well. I couldn't take that risk. I understand. Anyway, fact is, I really don't have squat to resist you with. I think as much of my people as you do of yours, and I won't murder them in a cause that I have just this morning learned is lost. Can we do this without any humiliating surrender ceremonies, Hatfield? We keep our colors, officers keep their sidearms, so forth and so on. If you've got a band, you can march out while they play, said Hatfield. Do you have enough vehicles to transport your men? If so, then we'll give them an escort to Portland as far as the first American outposts on Highway 30. I'd prefer to cut over to Salem and head down to California on the interstate, said Ratcliffe. I would rather not meet up with General Parkman right at the moment. I can imagine, said Hatfield sympathetically. My intelligence guy in the suit over there says you and he have been doing a lot of cyber-yakking. Don't suppose you'd care to tell me what all that was about? A little hint? Ratcliffe looked up into the sky. This is a beautiful place, Hatfield. Good people. I envy you being born here, growing up here. It had its moments, agreed Hatfield. He nodded back to where Julia and Erica were watching as the cameraman filmed. She was one of them. Ratcliffe looked at him. You know Parkman is planning on attacking the towns here as well, Astoria and Warrenton? Not just the bridges? B-52 seconds, F-16 seconds, and Apaches? He's planning to punish the people here for their wicked racism. Yes, I know. Enraged tyrants always punish those who refuse to bend the knee, replied Hatfield. You don't have to worry about the B-52 seconds, though. Some of our extraordinary young people took care of them last night. They're toast on the runway up there now. What did Parkman want you to do? Ratcliffe appeared to make a decision. He wanted me to make sure some items we had here were DX'd and rendered completely unserviceable. He was very anxious they shouldn't fall into your hands. And did you? I couldn't seem to find them, said Ratcliffe. I think I was about to check the hard store in Hangar 19. He pulled a ring of keys out of his pocket. Since you're relieving me of my command, perhaps you can also relieve me of that responsibility. 2 hours later, after the last of the Coast Guardsmen had evacuated the station and were on their way south under escort, one of the chief petty officers who had elected to stay on showed Zack, Hill, and Len Ekstrom what was in Hangar 19. It was a small storeroom stacked high with long OD green plastic crates. The big brass was always paranoid about suicide attacks from airplanes ever since 9/11, the sailor explained. They were always scared you guys were going to hijack an airliner and ram it into the big bridge or the station here or some stupid crap like that. They got so paranoid they sent us all these babies. Good God, exclaimed Len Ekstrom. Stinger missiles.
No wonder Parkman wanted them destroyed, said Hill excitedly. There must be at least 50 of them in here.
Oscar, contact the Army Council. Put out the word all through the NDF, said Hatfield. Make it fast, but above all, make it top secret. This is a priority. We are going to need every volunteer with military experience who has ever fired, or handled, or who knows anything at all about stingers. I do, sir, said the CPO. Me and at least 4 of the guys who stayed. If you're short on vets who've used these weapons, we can work up a quick training course for the new crews. It will have to be a real quick course. Chief, you know Parkman's coming with his F-16 seconds and copters? Said Hatfield keenly. This morning you were a member of the United States military. Technically you still are. The men flying those machines will be as well. Are you willing to fire on them in order to protect the people of this community and the future of this new country? I'm from up in Anacortes, Washington, sir, said the Coast Guardsman. That makes this my country. No, comrade, said Hatfield, shaking his head. You are a white man, and that is what makes this your country. Hatfield's fabled luck held. Thanks to multifarious political mumbling and maneuvering, it wasn't until the morning of October 27th that Parkman launched his aerial assault. On the Columbia River bridges, 2 F-16 seconds loaded with bombs and missiles, and 4 Apache gunships apiece against Astoria and Longview. The Stingers had been equally distributed between the two targets, and as the jets swooped in, the handheld missiles were fired almost like an old-fashioned volley of musketry. Even though the crews were half composed of new and inexperienced volunteers, the effect was devastating. Of the Longview attack force, only 2 Apaches made it back to Portland. One of the F-16 seconds crashed into the town and killed several people on the ground, and before it went down in a flaming spiral, the second was able to get 1 missile hit on the bridge, which blew a gaping hole in the tarmac and girders that was temporarily but effectively repaired within 24 hours. The Astoria attack force was completely wiped out, both F-16 seconds disintegrating in midair and raining fire and molten metal into the Columbia River, causing geysers of steam to explode into the air. 2 of the Astoria Apaches were blown to pieces by the Stingers, and 1 was shot down by machine gun fire. The 4th helicopter was forced down on the River Walk, where its Mexican pilot and black CO pilot were chased down by a mob of irate citizens who didn't appreciate being treated like Iraqi villagers beaten to death with whatever came to hand, and then dragged down ironically renamed Lockhart Boulevard on ropes behind 2 pickup trucks. On October 30th, the Nationalist General Robert DeBella crossed the newly repaired Longview Bridge from Washington to the Oregon side, bringing with him 14,000 NDF troops, including 2,000 members of the Crack News Special Service, or SS, one unit of which called itself the Jesse Lockhart Brigade. He joined forces in Clatsop County with General Zack Hatfield, commanding around 8,000 more men, and together they began a careful enveloping movement eastward toward Portland, not just over the main highways which were vulnerable to air attack, but down logging roads and rural routes, guided by local men provided by Hatfield's 3rd Brigade. At the same time, General Robert Gare, newly arrived from the Longview Peace Conference, moved in on Portland from Salem in the south with about 16,000 men. Across the river in Vancouver, Washington, SS General Carter Wingfield had massed 45,000 NDF troops, including panzer units of captured or surrendered American tanks, as well as a formidable artillery train courtesy of defecting U.S. Army troops from Fort Lewis. On Halloween night, Zack and Julia stood on the south bank of the Columbia, a few miles up from the City of Roses. The night was cold but clear, and there was thunder and lightning up the river. "Those sound like cannons. That son of a bitch Parkman," swore Julia, hugging Zack for warmth. "He's shelling Vancouver." Zack studied the low flashing lights in the distance. "No, Julie," he said. "I'm pretty sure those flashes are coming from the north side of the river. Those are Carter Wingfield's boys. Those are our guns. The guns of white men who mean to be free." The assault on Portland had begun.